Okay, welcome again, everyone. We're going to start so that we don't lose any of the great time we're going to have hearing from Anirban. And if you would all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me, I'd appreciate that. The flag is here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Again, welcome everybody. This is going to be a really good meeting. We look forward to this every single year. I'm Mike McMullen. I'm president of the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce. We've been around for 101 years, and I've been here for 15, so this has been a great group to be involved in, all the beautiful members that we have here. You guys are what makes things happen here in Carroll, small business. Going to thank everyone. I'm going to bring Richard up here in a second, and then we'll be thanking our sponsors. We've got ACMB Bank, ACMB Insurance, we've got the City of Westminster, and we've got partnering us with this event, Carroll County Economic Development. We'll hear from Denise. Partnership. Inside joke, sorry about that. I want to thank the Community Media Center for being here. They're filming this and it will be rebroadcast on Comcast High Definition, 1072, Channel 19, YouTube, their Facebook page, their website, and our website. It'll be probably on CNN too. They get it everywhere, so that was a joke actually, probably not. I also want to thank everybody from the Pleasant Valley Community Fire Company. Great, beautiful place, isn't it? Give them a round of applause. That being said, we're going to move right along. I want to introduce you to your MC for the day, a great guy and the chair of the board for the chamber, so I've got to say nice things about him because he's my boss this year, Richard Turner.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. It's a wonderful opportunity, I think, to be able to be not only here at Pleasant Valley, but the Community Fire Company, but in your company as well. So, you know, we have, as usual, a number of elected officials and people we want to recognize who are here among us. I'm going to ask you to hold your applause because it's an extensive list. First from our Carroll County Commissioners, Kenneth Kyler, and Joe Bigliotti, Tom Gordon, and Michael Gure. I don't know if they're all here. Okay. And then also our County Administrator, Roberta Wyndham, is here. Carroll County's Director of Economic Development, Denise Beaver. And members of our Board of Education. I don't know if any came. Let's see if there's anyone. Very good. All right. So our New Windsor Mayor, Kevin Cornick. Westminster City Council members Tony Chiavacci and Kevin Dayhoff here. Thank you. Chiavacci. Tonytown City Council members Jim McCarran. And also I'd like to recognize Perry Odenwald, who's here from Representative Olszewski's office. And we give them a round of applause for our elected officials. I don't know if we missed any of our elected officials. Now's your chance. Scanning the room, all right, very good. I think we did a good job. Thank you, staff. President of Carroll Community College, Dr. Rose Mintz is here. President of Gerstel Academy, John Palasco. Also from Gerstel Academy, we want to recognize their Academy of the Finance students who are here as well. Students are here. And also from our Carroll County Public Schools, from their Finance Academy, we have students joining us this morning. So we're here. Great to have our students with us. Now I'll honor our past chairs of the chamber and ask them to stand and be recognized. Immediate past chair, Richard Turner. Oh no, wait, that's the list for November, I think. Okay. All right. January. Our immediate past chair, Andrea Bursler. Andrea. Wayne Barnes. Is Wayne here? There's Wayne. Steve Aquino. Dave Bollinger. Steve Wentz. Suzette Cobalt. And Christine Walters. And also now we'd like to recognize the current Chamber Board of Directors and ask them to stand and be recognized. Give them a hand for their service. You know, I wanted to take a quick moment to say it's really my honor and privilege to be the chair of the Board of Directors this year. It's been a tough couple of days if your business was relying on the cloud, huh? Yeah, I hear some groans. How many of you utilize AWS services or one of their service providers and didn't have anything connected yesterday? They promised 99.9% uptime, but that means that there's a chance of 1% downtime. Now here, you get a chance of 100% uptime, right? It's your opportunity to connect, to network, and that's really where we make a difference in terms of building relationships, and that's what the Chamber is really about. You know, when we build these face-to-face relationships, we achieve the core mission of the Chamber is to promote a sound economic environment in which our business community can prosper. I have experienced this myself with every ribbon cutting, new member orientation, PM connections, AM connections, and other Chamber events I've attended as your board chair. Through our member services programs and our advocacy, our goal is prosperous, sustainable business that in turn support the quality of life that we experience here in Carroll County. Advocacy and engagement are key towards effective community development. Because of the Chamber's commitment to these principles, I've also been able to attend meetings including the Department of Economics Development All-Day Summit that was with Tom Barking, the President and CEO of the Richmond Federal Reserve Bank. And 30 years ago, someone said, yeah, someday you'll be in a meeting with one of the heads of the Federal Reserve. I'll go like, yeah, you're crazy. But it was really an inspiring day and a part of that connection that we have with the Chamber. It gave me an opportunity to ask him, you know, if the Federal Reserve Bank was one of the fingers of the invisible hand in the marketplace, to which he responded, some think it's the middle finger. It's a true story. I also had the opportunity to represent the Chamber at a meeting of the Governor's Office of Small, Minority, and Women's Business Affairs. And to be a better representative, I sought your input. I thought it was important to hear from you, and I asked it by way of survey. And I want to thank all of you who provided input for me because it allowed me to be a better representative and to represent how challenging it can be in the business environment and doing business, particularly with the state. So thank you for showing up as active members for this Chamber's annual meeting. Now on to our business portion of the meeting. We have once a year at the Chamber's meeting, our members elect 6 directors for 3-year terms that begin the following January 1st. 2 of the current directors whose first terms expire on December 31st are eligible to serve second terms. I know somehow, I guess Mike did a successful job in twisting some arms or something, and they have agreed to do so. Our existing board of directors has approved and recommends that the membership elect the following individuals to serve 3-year terms beginning January 1st, 2026. Members agreeing as a second term are Dr. Jim Ball as an individual member, Seth Shipley, who's with Shipley's Diamonds and Fine Jewelry. Members agreeing to serve to a first term are Steve Aquino, even though he's a repeat, maybe a retread, I don't know. Okay. Aquino Financial Group, Jack McCracken from Brown Plus, Dr. Rose Mintz with Carroll Community College, and Jacqueline Roberts of R&W Kitchen and Bath LLC. On behalf of the Chamber members and the Board of Directors and our Chamber staff, I'd like to say a special word of thanks to Andrea Birschler and to John Allen, and as they are both finishing their second consecutive term, 3-year terms at the end of this year. So let's give them a round of applause. Thanks. Now on to the nomination and voting. The Chamber's board therefore recommends that the membership elect the following 6 individuals to 3-year terms beginning January 1st, 2026. Dr. Jim Ball, Seth Shipley, Dr. Rose Mintz, Steve Aquino, Jack McCracken, Jacqueline Roberts. Thank you. This motion has been made. And there is a second. Let me remind you that during this portion of the event, only one representative from organizations or member organizations present may vote or otherwise act as a voice as a chamber member. To get the business of the meeting on the floor, we've got this motion before us. Thank you. And now, is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, are there any further nominations? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Congratulations, the motion is approved. Now on to today's program. We have some great sponsors, and we are very appreciative of our sponsors who help make this program happen. Allow me to introduce those sponsors. Yesterday was Community Media Day across the nation. We had a great opportunity to celebrate. You might not have seen it in the news because I guess they don't cover it that way. But all the great work that we do at the Community Media Center was something that was recognized across the country. And so we are fortunate that we have Susan Reed here to do our first sponsor, which is our media sponsor. Susan, if you'll go ahead and come forward. Welcome, Susan Reed, Director of Business Development at the Community Media Center.
Thank you, Richard. As he said, I am Susan Reed, still. Director of Business Development at the Community Media Center. I'm almost made it through my first year. So at the Media Center, we focus on one thing, keeping you, our Carroll County leadership and residents, informed, engaged, and connected through our local digital media. And we know our work is making a difference. Our municipality coverage keeps citizens informed, our coverage of community events keeps everyone connected, and just this past year, our Central Maryland Sports Network, as you know as CM Sportsnet, our programming reached over 2 million views across cable and social media during the 2024-25 season. However, we are facing a challenge that threatens our very existence. As more and more people cut the cord and move to streaming, the cable franchise fees that have long supported community media are shrinking. For CMC to continue providing these essential services and grow our coverage, we need your support. So on your tables, there are flyers explaining how to become a CMC sponsor to sustain our sports programming. And on the flip side of the flyer, you'll find information about other opportunities, including our upcoming documentary, Thriving Together, The Power of Inclusion, that follows the stories of 4 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and how they make an impact in our community. As well as our Veterans Oral History Project, which has collected over 100 interviews with local veterans. And to honor them, tune in on November 11th for a special all-day broadcast on cable channels HD 1072 and Channel 19 featuring Carroll County veterans' personal accounts of service to our country. Community media matters, and with your support, we can continue providing trusted local coverage you've come to love. Please watch local and tell your friends and family and colleagues to check out carrollmediacenter.org for our new streaming service, CM Sportsnet Plus, coming soon to a screen near you. Thank you all.
Some have accused me of doing double dose of caffeine in our offices. That's natural energy on her part, and I think we'll keep her for another year. Our next sponsor is our gold sponsor. First, our sponsors. First is ACNB Bank and Insurance Services. Representing them both is Senior Vice President Drew Heck. Drew.
Okay, thanks. It's an honor to be able to sponsor this event. My name is Drew Heck. I run the commercial lending team in Maryland, 8 lenders. ACNB Bank has been around since 1857. They came in and merged with New Windsor State Bank, which I was a member with 8 years ago, and the merger went great. We're a community bank. We've got 5 offices here in Carroll County. We're a one-stop shop financial needs. We have everything, including wealth management, and we talked about ACNB Insurance, which is actually the largest insurance company in Carroll County. What's the difference between a big bank and a community bank? We offer everything a big bank can do, but we also offer the following. We have local decision makers. Our management board of directors live here. Accountability. We know the decisions that we make affect our business in our community. We have real relationships. You can talk to us anytime, and we'll be there to answer. We've got deep local roots. Our team lives here and raised our family here, so we want to make sure this community thrives. And we're also a helping hand. We value giving back. We volunteer. We are on boards of all nonprofits in the community. So one last thing, in the front desk, we have a couple promotions going on. We are actually offering up to $1,000 for new business accounts open. And then there's also a flyer on the desk for $200 for a personal checking account. So if you're interested in any of those, you can talk to any of the representatives here or just stop by a branch. Thanks.
And now for our second gold sponsor, it is the City of Westminster. So we'll welcome up Council Member Tony Ciabacci, and who is also the Council Chair.
Hi, I'm Tony Ciabacci. I'm the President of the Westminster City Council. I'm here on behalf of the Mayor and the Council and staff. We're proud to be sponsoring this event. You know, this event is about the local economy, and the City of Westminster is putting its money where its mouth is. We're under construction currently with the first water reuse facility in the state of Maryland. As a matter of fact, we believe it's the first facility in this area of the country. That facility is going to provide us with a sustainable solution to water scarcity, and we're very proud of it. It is going to be completed, we believe, December of 26, which is really going to have a very positive economic impact in our community. I also wanted to take a moment and thank the county commissioners, their staff, for their support of this project as well. They ponied up quite a few bucks for this, and we're very grateful for it. We couldn't have done it without their help. Thank you very much.
Okay, now on to our diamond sponsor and partners, the Carroll County Economic Development, and we're going to invite up Denise Beaver.
Good morning. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Mike, for the diamond sponsorship opportunity. As many of you know, Carroll County Economic Development was the original catalyst to bring Anirban Basu to Carroll County for all of you to enjoy his economic insights. And we're very appreciative for the Chamber to continue this tradition. This talk is something that everyone looks forward to. In Carroll County, our strength has always come from the connections that we build with one another, partnerships like with the Chamber. We have a new partnership with the Community Media Center, actually just this week, in case you haven't heard, Richard, and with our community. So each partnership and each conversation brings shared ideas and new opportunities for growth and reminds us that none of us can succeed alone. As leaders, I think we have the privilege and the responsibility to lift each other up and to collaborate and to share resources and to celebrate one another's successes. When we work together, our collective impact is greater than what any one of us could achieve alone. This week is Economic Development Week, so we're very excited about that. It's where the Maryland Economic Development Association members are celebrating efforts all across the state in terms of improving the profession as a whole and the work that we all do to improve Maryland's business climate, bring jobs and capital to the state, and promote economic development as a profession. In Carroll County, our team is out visiting 20 companies and institutions that are pillars of our community, some that have been here for over 150 years. When Carroll County visits the 3 bond rating agencies next week in New York City, I will be talking about these community pillars and our great economy and the strength that they bring to our communities and to our economy. This Thursday, the Carroll County Board of Commissioners will recognize the week by delivering an Economic Development Week proclamation. And we will be posting the visit photos on our website and social media, so follow along at carrollbiz.org. I'm so proud of each of you who are working to build and grow better in Carroll County. Let's continue to nurture the spirit of cooperation that defines Carroll County, a place where people care deeply, lead boldly, and invest in a brighter future for all. Together we can keep our community thriving and connected and growing stronger every day. So next I would like to introduce our keynote speaker today. We're so excited that Anirban Basu is back here with us. in some questions we're going to think about today, and as he delivers his remarks, is the U.S. economy headed for recession? Or can America weather emergency trade wars, associated cost increase, and uncertainty? This presentation focuses on the U.S. and the regional economies and performance with an eye towards identifying emerging risks to what has been the world's most envied economy. Among variables of interest are interest rates, employment growth, real estate valuations, and a variety of leading economic indicators. Anirban Basu, as you probably know, is the chairman and CEO of the Sage Policy Group, Incorporated. He has been called an economist with a sense of humor, and that's how I always introduce you when I'm talking about you. He has been named one of Baltimore region's 20 most powerful business leaders. In 2014, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan appointed Dr. Basu as a chairman of the Maryland Economic Development Commission, a position he held through 2021. Dr. Basu currently serves on the boards of many regional institutions, including the University of Maryland School of Law, St. Mary's College, the University of Maryland Medical Center, the University System of Maryland Foundation, the Lyric Opera House, and the Archdiocese of Baltimore School System. Please welcome Mr. Anirban Basu.
No? Yes you can. So great to be here in Carroll County, obviously, and Denise Beaver, as it turns out, is one of the most, or among the most accomplished economic development professionals in the state and the country, by the way, and she happens to be in Carroll County. And I was also told to tell you that the Chamber of Commerce is one of the best chambers of commerce in the country. So in any case, my presentation today is entitled Monetary Masala. It's a play on a 1991 film called Mississippi Masala, starring the two actors who you see on the screen, one with whom undoubtedly you're very familiar, the actor Denzel Washington, recently named by the New York Times as the greatest actor of the 21st century. The other actor you might be a bit less familiar with, her name is Srita Chowdhury, the Indian-British actress. 1991's Mississippi Masala was her cinematic debut. I've been following her career ever since. In fact, I met her. Yeah, I met her at JFK Airport. She was on the same flight with me from New York to New Delhi. I actually, before the flight, approached her, started talking to her, undaunted by her fame, and my very strong belief is, had another 15 seconds, I could have changed both of our lives. But if I'm being honest, the encounter did not work out exactly as I had envisioned, so I'm going to stick with Denzel Washington as the unifying theme of this presentation, and I will talk about tariffs and immigration policy and other policies emerging from Washington, D.C., but I want to talk about much more than that. I want to talk about the broader macroeconomic context into which these policies fit or don't fit, and of course how these policies are reshaping the trajectory of various aspects of the economy. Now, if we were in a low inflation, low interest rate environment, there would be one set of implications from these policies. But as you know, we've been in a higher interest rate, higher inflation environment, and so there are another set of implications. This title slide is a play on a 2009 Denzel Washington film called The Taking of Pelham 123, in which he stars as a train dispatcher. But the Taking of Inflation 2.0, of course, refers to the fact that the Federal Reserve's target for inflation is 2%, and we have not been at that target inflation rate now for more than 4 years. It is true that inflation is not as elevated as it used to be. It peaked in mid-2022, but the latest data indicate that we are still mired in this excess inflation environment. So two measures of inflation here. The green line reflects inflation as measured by the core CPI, the core consumer price index. Core means all items minus food and energy. Food and energy prices are, of course, important. We'll talk about those momentarily, but we economists often prefer looking at these core metrics because food and energy prices are A, volatile, and B, susceptible to non-economic influences like weather, natural disaster, and of course, geopolitics. And so to derive a pure measure of economic inflation, we often look at these core metrics, and this measure says that over the last 12 months, which we have data, inflation in our country running at 3.1%. And if you can see the end of the time series, you might notice a bit of an upward tilt in inflation recently. In other words, attainment of that 2% target has proven increasingly elusive recently. Inflation is reaccelerating. The blue line reflects inflation as measured by the Federal Reserve's favorite measure of inflation, the core PCE deflator, the personal consumption expenditure deflator. That says inflation running at 2.9% year over year, and also you'll notice the same phenomenon, that upward lilt in inflation during the back portion of the time series. Now, many implications to this for interest rates, for instance. We'll talk about interest rates a lot this morning, but also, of course, for the 2/3 of the economy that is the American population. Let me break this down for you a little bit. So just the last year of inflation, which we have data, August of 2024 to August of 2025, you've seen one of the headline numbers already. So the headlines are summarized down below: 3.1% overall inflation minus food and energy. If you put back food and energy prices, the inflation rate is 2.9%, but categorically in green, you can see, and by the way, we have a lot of young people here today. And if those young people need another reason not to smoke, here it is, because it's not good for your health. It does not actually make you look cool. It makes you look anachronistic, as it turns out. And it also was a category that suffered the most inflation over the past year. Prices for tobacco and smoking products up 6.3% over the past year. And yes, I'm including vaping as part of that. You can see, though, that the categories that are generally the least inflation, alcoholic beverages, we produce no French wine in this country. Look it up. And so, of course, the European Union is subject to 15% tariffs. New vehicles, so we have a tariff on auto parts, 25% from Canada, so on and so forth. So vehicle prices also have been rising, and you may have heard that for the first time, the average price of a newly purchased vehicle, a new car, is over $50,000. Apparel, Bangladesh facing a massive tariff, the Indians 50%, the Chinese 55%, so on and so forth. And then medical care commodities, that's your pharmaceutical drugs, for instance. So we have a 39% tariff against the Swiss. The Swiss sell us many therapies. The Indians sell us many generic drugs, for instance, a 50% tariff, so on and so forth. So the categories that heretofore have not been generating much inflation are precisely those that are most likely to be affected by the impact of tariffs on prices. More on tariffs in a moment. Now, as I say, this inflation has been with us for more than 4 years. So that burst of inflation shows up in early 2021. So let me take you back to May of 2020. Why that month is the baseline? That is the first month of the current economic expansion. So America loses 22 million jobs between March and April of 2020. We start to add back jobs in May of 2020. You might remember that governors like Ron DeSantis of Florida and Brian Kemp of Georgia began reopening their economies in April of 2020. Not saying that was good policy making or bad, that's for you to decide, but that did position those and other similar situated states to start adding jobs around that time. And by May of 2020, the overall nation is adding jobs and we are officially out of recession. So if you look at prices back then, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, and compare those prices to August of 2025 prices, so this is roughly a 5-year comparison period, a bit more than that, 5.25 years to be precise, this is how much inflation we suffered during that period, and that's reflected in these horizontal bars. So the headlines, again, summarized down below in blue. So how much inflation did America experience in roughly 5 years in a country that aspires to 2% inflation per annum? 26%. Strip out food and energy prices, still lofty 24%. Now categorically in green, you can see energy prices of 54%, transportation services, that's your shipping costs, of 53%. There's a neat correspondence between wage pressures and price pressures. Those things move in tandem. And in recent years, certain occupation categories have been associated with especially large increases in compensation, and one of those categories is truck driver. There's been a lot of labor market strife in America in recent years, strikes among actors and writers, Boeing machinists, UAW members, members of the International Insurance Association, and of course the recent strike at the New Jersey Transit Administration. But some negotiations have not ended in strikes, and a prominent example of one of those is the 2023 negotiation between United Parcel Service, UPS, and the Teamsters Union. Those negotiations produced a 5-year agreement, and during the 5th year of that agreement, the average full-time UPS truck driver will be earning $170,000 per year. That's $170K. That's wage plus benefits, but it's $170K. Force people like myself to ask the question, how do I look in brown? based on the app, spectacular. But the point is, when you have that kind of wage pressure, that would also tend to be inflationary. Shelter costs, that includes things like your apartment rents, up nearly 29% in roughly 5 years. Food prices up 27%. And that's what has many Americans most exercised, is that grocery bill. Oh, they complain about electricity rates, they complain about auto insurance rates and all manner of prices that they encounter, but it's really that food bill that's captured much of their attention. One of the things I do a lot of as an economist is I talk to a lot of Americans about the economy. And these conversations often transpire in Ubers and Lyfts. I take a lot of Ubers and Lyfts. I'll be flying tonight to Nashville, Tennessee for tomorrow morning's presentation there. Take an Uber, Lyft to the hotel and back to the airport, et cetera, and many of you also take Ubers and Lyfts. And therefore, you know as a passenger, you rate the driver, you may be less aware that the driver rates you as a passenger. And I very recently become privy to my passenger ratings, and they're extremely low. And you might say, well, that makes sense. I've been watching you speak now for about 7 minutes. I think this is beyond my personality, that there's something else afoot shaping this outcome, because I take every Uber or Lyft trip as an opportunity to interview an American. And I'll ask them questions like, and of course I'm doing this from the back seat, but I'll ask them questions like, hey, how much do you really make doing this on an hourly basis once you factor in depreciation, insurance, and gasoline? What's your highest level of education attainment? What are the options that you have? Have you ever considered an apprenticeship program? What does your family say about all this? Do you actually view this as a career? Why would you choose this vehicle in particular? And apparently these questions are off-putting. But when you ask me about the economy, the number one thing they say is, this one has to be upset, I can't keep up. And of course, on January 20th, the new president was inaugurated, though of course, the former president as well. Number 45 has become number 47. This county went big for Donald John Trump, of course. He won that 2024 election in Carroll County by 61% to 35%, 36% actually, over Kamala Harris. I call this slide, by the way, the Manhattan candidate, because there's some affinity between Donald Trump and Manhattan, also Queens and Mar-a-Lago. But it's also playing a 2004 Denzel Washington film called The Manchurian Candidate, in which he plays the part of Major Bennett Marco. Now, I'm not here to make any value. What's that? Did you hear that? No, I didn't. Maybe I'm hearing things. Did I say the chamber is one of the best? Okay, I said that. Okay, so the point is, I'm not here to make any value judgments about this policymaking. That's not my role here. I'm simply suggesting as a macroeconomist that some of these policies could put further upward pressure on prices, including, for instance, tariffs, which, as you know, are a tax on US importers, whether tariffs on nations, 50% again on India, et cetera, or a tariff on key goods, aluminum, steel, copper, all facing 50% tariffs, vehicles, 25%. Then, of course, on July 4th, the president signed the One Big Beautiful Bill. Lots of excitement in corporate America about that, including because of the restoration of 100% bonus depreciation, but many other tax benefits. And many of those benefits, by the way, are retroactive to January 1st of this year. One of the things that we have is the $40,000 SALT deduction from $10,000. And so because the IRS is yet to alter withholding schedules, many American families stand to receive massive tax refunds early next year, and we might have a chance to talk about the impact of that on the economic forecast later on during the presentation. However, the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan, indicates that that One Big Beautiful Bill will increase the national debt by $3.7 trillion in the next, $3.4 trillion in the next 10 years, $4.1 trillion if you add in interest on top of an already almost $38 trillion national debt. And to the extent that that tax cut is pushing more money back into the economy, that would tend to be inflationary. And then, of course, mass deportations. Now, I understand that for many Americans, the southern border has been a major issue. I understand that. And I understand that because I watch a ton of Fox News. I do. I watch a ton of Fox News, and I watch a ton of Fox News because my mom makes me. So my mom and dad live 4.5 miles away from me in Baltimore County, Maryland. My mom likes to hang out near the kitchen. She has a nice TV there, and she watches Fox News all day, every day, without exception. My father is on the other side of the house. He's in his home office. They have a nice place, so there's some distance there. He likes to play online bridge, and he likes to write. And he watches CNN all day, every day, without exception. And then while I'm there, my goal is to keep them from actually encountering one another, to keep them apart. But they will inevitably encounter one another within the home. And that's, of course, when I'm forced to leave, because they're operating in two different universes. So anyway, the point is I watch a lot of Fox News, so I understand the southern border is a major issue. However, to the extent that this mass deportation, by the way, about 1.6 million people have voluntarily left the country, another 400,000 have been encountered by ICE, to the extent that truncates the size of the labor force, meaning fewer workers in leisure hospitality, meaning hotels and restaurants, for instance, landscaping, construction, daycare, childcare, so on and so forth, that would tend to be inflationary. And the Federal Reserve is looking at all this and asking the question, well, what do we do about interest rates? This is their primary mechanism for influencing economic growth, and its byproduct inflation, the federal funds rate, also known as the Fed funds rate, also known as the overnight bank lending rate. This is the rate at which banks can borrow from one another overnight. And why would a bank do that? Because banks require a certain amount of reserves inside the bank to make loans outside of themselves, and occasionally banks are up against that constraint. When this rate is set at a low level, banks are more likely to borrow from one another, thereby shoring up their reserves, thereby lending more aggressively in the economy. When this rate is set at a higher level, an opposing behavior ensues. Now, the pandemic sweeps through the economy and undoes that economic momentum. The Federal Reserve predictably pushes interest rates as close to zero as was possible as the crisis overtakes the economy. Now, what's being graphed for you here is the upper limit on the federal funds rate. So the minimum possible here, the minimum possible reading, is 0.25%. That burst of inflation shows up in early 2021, but the Federal Reserve doesn't do anything about that inflation. As you know, they view that inflation to be transitory. A synonym for transitory is fleeting. They think it's purely supply chain driven, that as supply chains normalize post-pandemic, inflation will just naturally and automatically abate to that 2% level we'd enjoyed for many years prior to the pandemic. Instead, the Federal Reserve presides over the creation of a wage price spiral. So prices take off in early 2021, employees notice, boss, I need a raise. I cannot afford my life. Boss says, no problem, I'll give you a raise, I need you. Economies come back very, very quickly. I'm having a tough time getting other workers back to work. I'll just pass on my cost increases to my customers and clients. Wage price spiral. Now, after about a year of this, the Federal Reserve begins to push back on inflation. They start to raise interest rates. It begins in March of 2022, the first rate increase, a quarter point. But then the next meeting, a half a percentage point increase. Then the next 4 meetings, each meeting 0.75% each meeting, then back to 0.5, then another 0.25, then a 0.25. May 3rd of 2023, 0.25% increase. Pause that June, July 26th, 0.25% increase. Pause for 8 straight meetings. That's that flat spot that you see toward the northeast corner of the slide. And then late last year, the rate cutting begins, September 18th, half a percentage point. Stock market, you might remember, was very excited by that. Now roughly 13 months ago. Then the next meeting, November 7th of 2024, so it was 2 days after election, a quarter point rate cut, and then December 18th, a quarter point rate cut. And then the Federal Reserve, to start out 2025, does nothing on interest rates as inflation begins to pick up again, and they don't have the luxury of cutting interest rates, except then they do cut interest rates in September of this year, last month, by a quarter point. And later on during the presentation, I'll talk about why they did that. But that was not the big news from that meeting. That was not the headline. Everyone knew they were going to cut rates by a quarter point. What was the headline? The headline was that they indicated they were going to cut rates also in October. So they'll meet 29th and 30th of this month, and then again in December. The stock market and other markets had only been anticipating 1 rate cut during the balance of the year. But they said, no, we're going to give you 2 probably. And again, later on I'm going to talk about what changed. Inflation is still meaningfully above their 2% target, and yet they're more aggressively cutting interest rates. What changed? We'll talk about that momentarily. Now here's the thing. Despite this headwind of higher borrowing costs, the US economy has continued to perform. And the broadest indication of that is right here, growth in gross domestic product. Quarterly data, annualized rates of growth. These are real rates of growth, so inflation adjusted. The last quarter for which we have data is the second quarter of 2025, a quarter in which the US economy grew 3.8%. Now, we're in the 4th quarter. We're through the 3rd quarter of the year, but we don't yet have data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis regarding what happened from a GDP perspective during the now concluded 3rd quarter. But we do have an estimate from the Atlanta Federal Reserve, which maintains a model known as GDP Now, which indicates that during the third quarter, the US economy expanded 3.9% on an annualized basis. That's not recession. In fact, the GDP numbers suggest a quite strong economy. At the heart of that momentum is the fighting force known as the American consumer. Here are monthly retail sales. The last reading here is for August, perfectly fine month for retail sales. Retail sales up 0.6% for the month. And by the way, much of the growth of consumer outlays recently has not been on retail items here depicted, but rather on services, things like travel. So if you look at TSA checkpoint counts, the number of people passing through TSA checkpoints on a single day, that's up meaningfully from a year ago. And last year was a good year for US travel. They're spending on Beyonce concert tickets. They're spending on Taylor Swift concert tickets. In August of 2023, the average Taylor Swift concert ticket purchased on resale, and that's how Americans buy them on resale, sold for $1,619 per ticket. She sold at football stadiums in this country, often multiple times, same city, same week. She just for Australia, parenthetically, and the Australian government thanked her for improving their economy. She generated about $300 million of economic impact in 5 days. She's not merely a musical phenomenon, she's an economic one, and I will say to you once again that this thing between her and Travis Kelce remains the greatest thing in America right now. I think this is precisely what this nation needs during these tumultuous times. It's really brought us together as a people. Otherwise, I think we'd be quite divided as a people, politically or otherwise, but we're not. We're on the same page. And that's because of Taylor and Travis. It's phenomenal, it's fantastic, it's fabulous, it is not at all annoying. And what you have here is this hunky athlete from the Kansas City Chiefs, 3-time Super Bowl winning tight end, Travis Kelce, relationship with the savvy singer-songwriter Taylor Swift. There are pictures of them kissing on the internet, and this has many Americans aglow, abuzz, and hopeful. And there's reason for hope, because unlike many stories, this one stands to end well, because when that breakup occurs, and it will occur, the music is going to flow, and I, for one, cannot wait. Now, I'm going to make the case later on during the presentation that the consumer cannot continue to spend as they have been, but not yet, because here's something else that happened in America during a time of higher interest rates. America became much wealthier. This is total US household wealth as measured by the Federal Reserve. Back in 1990, which is not that long ago, total US household wealth was sitting at $20 trillion, and we thought we were a pretty wealthy society back then. It ends last year, begins this year at $160 trillion, and because of a recent surge in stock prices, has risen now to $167 trillion. America's never been wealthier. No society has ever been wealthier than America, because no one creates wealth like the Americans. Because no one creates companies like Google, Meta, Palantir, Broadcom, Oracle, you name it, Caterpillar. Now, you might point out to me, however, that while there is a wealth effect in terms of spending, so the wealthier people are, the more likely they're to spend in the economy, all things being equal, that wealth is not neatly distributed across the population, and that's absolutely true. More Federal Reserve Bank data, but here I'm simply disaggregating wealth by percentile. I'm stacking the most affluent households in America down through the least affluent and ask the question, where does the wealth reside in America? That light green slice at the very top represents the wealth controlled by the top 0.1% of Americans. That's your 1 in 1,000 household or better. There are about 340,000 members of those households, and those households collectively control about 13.9% of American wealth. The dark green segment below that is wealth controlled by the balance of the top 1%. So at your 99th percentile to your 99.9th percentile, they control 17.1% of the nation's wealth, which means that the top 1% controls 31% of the nation's wealth. The yellow segment below that is the wealth controlled by the balance of the top 10%. So at your 90th percentile to your 99th percentile, they control 36.4% of the nation's wealth, which means that the top 10% controls almost precisely 2/3 of the nation's wealth. The brown/orangey segment below that is wealth controlled by the 50th percentile to the 90th percentile. That's 40% of America's population, and that 40% controls 30.1% of the nation's wealth, which means that the bottom 50% of America controls 2.5% of the nation's wealth. The top 50%, 97.5%, bottom 50%, 2.5%. It's two different countries. From a wealth profile perspective, America is two separate nations. You can call it haves and have-nots, haves and have less, haves and have yachts. Whatever you want to call it, it is that. Now, it is the case that many folks in the bottom 50% are homeowners. U.S. home ownership rate is above 65%. So many of them have equity in their homes, but they have very little financial wealth. They live from paycheck to paycheck or on fixed incomes. And what do you need in a nation with so much wealth disparity, so much wealth inequality? Well, it's apparent, isn't it? It's readily apparent what you need. It's obvious. You need an equalizer. This is Denzel playing the part of Robert McCall. This was such a good movie, they effectively made it 3 times with almost no change in plot. And because the first one was good, the last 2 were very good as well. I presume the 4th one will be amazing too if they produce it. And the point is, what has been the great equalizer economically? It's been that job market. So while wealth inequality has surged in America, income inequality not nearly as much. Indeed, it has often been the case in recent years. The most rapid growth in compensation has been among, in percentage terms, has been among entry-level or near entry-level workers. Unfortunately, this is really where you see the economy slowing down. Not the stock market, not with a NASDAQ chasing 23,000 or a Dow Jones chasing 47,000 or an S&P chasing 6,700. No, not in the GDP numbers, in part because of the way we measure gross domestic product, but in the jobs numbers. So for instance, if you look at the JOLTS, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, it reveals that in August, America home to 7.2 million available unfilled jobs. Now, that's not catastrophic. It's akin to where we were pre-pandemic. But I can now say for the first time in years, and I don't necessarily want to say it, that we have more unemployed people, 7.4 million, than job openings, 7.2 million. And where you really see the softness is in monthly job creation, which is shown here. This is that headline number that comes out every first Friday of the month, so 12 times a year. Of course, it did not come out in early October because the government, as you know, shut down. And so we'll see when we get that number. And it's going to obviously complicate data analysis even when the number comes out, because how many people were around to collect the data that we need to analyze? Anyway, the point is, if you look at the last month, which of data, August of 2025, that month the nation added 22,000 jobs, but in a country with 340 million people, statistically, that's 0. It's indifferent to 0 statistically. And it's been statistically indifferent to 0 for 4 months. Now, of course, things have changed in America. When migration was rapid into this country, the nation probably needed to add 125,000 to 150,000 jobs a month to keep unemployment stable. But the labor force has not grown since January of this year. So how many jobs do you have to add to keep unemployment stable? Roughly 0, and that's how many jobs we're adding. It is true that unemployment has ticked higher over the course of the year, from 4% at the beginning of the year to 4.3% now, but again, nothing catastrophic. You may have also heard, chamber members, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which produces these data, recently revised lower their estimates of job creation for a 1-year period stretching from April of 2024 to March of 2025 by negative 911,000. And you might ask the question, Anirban, is that revision reflected in your data here? And the answer is, no, it is not. And then you might ask the question, why is that, sir? Is it because you're politically biased or lazy? I'm lazy. But that's not why the revision is not there. That was a preliminary revision. The final revision will not come out until February of 2026, and that's when that revised, or those revised data will be woven into this chart, into the data series. But let me give you a sense of the magnitude of this preliminary revision. So these are unrevised data. So based on the unrevised data, between April of 2024 and March of 2025, America added 146,000 jobs per month on average. But negative 911,000, if you do the math, over 12 months, that's a negative 76,000 jobs per month. So how many jobs were we really adding? Not 146,000, probably closer to 70,000 jobs a month. And that's why I think the Federal Reserve has been more aggressive in cutting interest rates. Even with inflation above 3%, it's because, by some measures, it's because they did not realize how quickly the US economy was slowing, even late last year, particularly the labor market. And so they're taking out insurance policies to try to maintain unemployment at some steady state level, and they do not want the economy to fall into recession. So the economy actually, at least from a labor market perspective, has been softening quite meaningfully. Now, what about Maryland, our state? Now, this says Maryland non-farm employment, not because farm employment is not important in the free state, of course it is, but farm employment data are captured by the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and are not additive to these, which come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is a component of the U.S. Department of Labor. Now, I won't go through all the bars. Let me just talk about the headlines here. So this is back to February of 2020 as the baseline. Why February of 2020? That's the last month before we shut down the US economy. So if you look at how many jobs were reported in Maryland in February of 2020 as the pandemic undoes the economy, or is about to, and compare those job totals to August of 2025, which is the last month in which we have these data. Over that period, Maryland, this is 5.5 years. In 5.5 years, Maryland added 51,700 jobs, or 1.8% to its job totals over that 5.5 year period. The nation in that same period added 4.8% to its job totals. So Maryland added jobs at less than half the pace of the balance of the country, but there's more. If you look at the green colored bars, what was the #1 sector adding jobs in Maryland's economy over this period? Government. Government was responsible for the lion's share of net new jobs created. Well, of course, government dynamics have changed. And of course, people focus on DOGE and the fact that we've lost 15,000 federal government jobs in the state since January. But the state government has had to curtail some of its spending as well, in part to close that $3.3 billion shortfall they face coming into the General Assembly session of this year. So government is not going to be the driver that it used to be. What does Maryland need to do to countervail that? We need to attract much more private investment. If government is no longer going to be the driver of economic growth in the state, we have to attract much more private investment, which is why people like Denise Beaver become that much more important. Unfortunately, Maryland is not well positioned to attract private investment. I'll give you an example. And by the way, if we were competing against Vermont, Connecticut, Rhode Island, no problem. We could probably do that. But we compete against Pennsylvania. Governor Josh Shapiro is doing some amazing things in the Commonwealth from an economic development perspective. He's really putting that state back on the map. The Virginians are very competitive. Our corporate tax rate in this state is 8.25%. In North Carolina, it's 2.25%. It's very difficult to compete with that. And so, we are pushing the boulder uphill. We need to attract that private investment. The government is not going to save us economically right now. By the way, no one could have predicted Trump 2.0. I don't think anyone could have seen this coming. But we knew that in a nation with a $38 trillion national debt, that at some point the federal government was going to cut back on spending, and that we need to be diversifying our economy. We did not do that particularly well over the last couple of decades. And so now we're really feeling the sting of that. Now, let me show you some more data, more regional data, but this is for the 25 largest metropolitan areas of the country. So this is percentage job growth for these 25 very populous communities between February of 2020 and August of 2025, just taking a percentage delta in terms of the number of jobs scored by these communities. The left-hand column includes those regions that have added jobs the fastest. There's a neat correspondence between population growth and job growth. Austin, Texas recently supplanted Portland, Oregon to become the 25th most populous metropolitan in the country, and Austin could have its own column. There's been no boomtown like Austin, Texas. It's really quite remarkable. I actually spoke there last week on a boat. I was on Lake Austin. I'll never do that again. But the point is, it's really, as you know, much of the growth in Austin has been technology. As major companies from Silicon Valley have established major beachheads in the Austin metropolitan, including Apple with this massive campus, but many, many others. Number 2 is Dallas. In recent years, no region of the country has added more people in absolute terms than the Dallas metropolitan area. That's North Texas. It has been booming. Flat land, plentiful rainfall, very developable, favorable zoning policies, favorable tax policies, lots of infrastructure leverage. North Texas and Dallas are built for growth. By the way, no region of the country overpays their quarterback as much as the Dallas metropolitan area. But I'm persuaded that those things are purely coincidental. Now, it's the American South, however, right? Because it's Austin, Dallas, Orlando, San Antonio, Charlotte, Tampa, Phoenix, Atlanta, Houston, Miami. That's the South. That's where the population growth has been. That's where the job growth has been. The Northeast corridor is largely in that right-hand column. New York Metro, Baltimore, this region, Washington Metro, and then toward the bottom, Boston, number 23. Boston, of course, is a very successful community, operating at the vanguard of financial services, IT, life sciences, so on and so forth, but that's what's also made it very expensive. And one of the things that many Americans are searching for is lower cost of living. And so this has created some centrifugal forces pushing people out of the Boston area into states like Maine and New Hampshire, and then 2 very expensive markets bringing up the rear, Los Angeles and San Francisco. Now, these are unemployment rates for the same 25 major metropolitan areas. And now again, you observe a new story emerging in America if you look toward the bottom of the right-hand column. So I don't mean to make a mountain out of a molehill. These unemployment rates are not astronomical. Houston, 5%, San Diego, 5%, Philly, 5.1%, New York Metro, 5.2%, LA, 5.9%, Riverside, California, 6.1%. Even 6.1% is not astronomical. In Canada, the nationwide unemployment rate is 7.1%. In Ontario, which is 40% of their economy, it's 7.9%. So 6.1% is not shocking. However, these rates of unemployment are higher than they were. And so what we're observing in certain parts of the country is that virtuous cycle is starting to break apart. Of what does that virtuous cycle consist? Consumer spending, impact employers hiring, which fuels further spending. But now the labor market is starting to slow down. And that suggests that consumer spending will slow down. More on that in a moment. Now, unemployment rates in Maryland, we have 24 major jurisdictions. You will notice Carroll County has among the lowest rates of unemployment in the country at 3.4%. You say, well, that's great news, Anirban. It is at a certain level. Of course it is. It means that if there's a job seeker in Carroll County, their likelihood of finding a job in the near term is quite high. But it also suggests it's very difficult for expanding businesses to find workers. And that's a housing issue. And as we know, we have major housing issues in the state, hard to deal with, as a lot of people do not want residential development. I understand that, particularly of apartments. I have met people who would rather have a nuclear facility in their backyard than an apartment. That's true, as it turns out. But, so in any case, but many of the counties in Maryland still have an unemployment rate of below 4%. And so part of the reason for this is that we're really constrained in terms of housing. There's really only one major jurisdiction that would like to add more people, and that's Baltimore City. But Baltimore City also maintains the highest real property tax rate at 2.248 per $100 assessed value of any region, 2.246 or 2.248, one of the two. And so people can't afford it. They don't want to pay that kind of tax rate. So the city's population is roughly stagnant. Meanwhile, many of the suburbs are fighting off population growth. And now that takes me to the next part of the presentation. I want to talk about some risks to the macroeconomic outlook, and I use this movie as a segue, Devil in a Bunch of Data, which is a play on a 1995 Denzel Washington film called Devil in a Blue Dress, in which he stars as a very handsome Easy Rawlins. The film is rooted in Los Angeles, embraces the film noir vibe, and I think one of the elements of being the greatest actor of the 21st century is being attractive. And let's face it, Denzel Washington is that. He's a very good-looking gentleman. Dare I say gorgeous. I'm married with 2 children, but I can still tell, you know what I mean? So in any case, so let me talk about some risks to the macroeconomy beyond tariffs, beyond immigration policy, whatever that happens, or interest rates, et cetera. And if you're going to talk about risks to the macroeconomic outlook, you've got to start with the consumer. You cannot have a downturn unless the consumer participates. Oh, the consumer is seldom the instigator of an economic downturn. For that, you need the commercial real estate debacle in the 1980s and attendant savings and loans crisis. Or you need the dot-com bubble bursting in 2000, followed by the 2001 recession. Or you need the housing bubble bursting in 05, 06, 07, followed by the 07 through 09 recession, or you need COVID. But at some point, the consumer's got to become involved in that dynamic for there to be a full-fledged economy-wide economic downturn. And thus far, though there's been some weakness at Starbucks that just changed their CEO, or May retail sales, thus far the consumer has not been engaged in that kind of dynamic. But can they continue to spend as they have been? And that brings me to an analysis from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and the metric of interest here is personal or household savings measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. So that green line at the bottom of the slide is personal savings. You will note that there's a reasonably smooth trajectory in personal savings as we march toward the pandemic, but then the pandemic changed everything. Because during the pandemic, many Americans received stimulus payments, many American businesses received paycheck protection and other forms of support, including some support that may not have been required, including, for instance, among the Los Angeles Lakers. And then, of course, many employees received meaningful increases in compensation. So for many American households, household income is rising precisely as their expenditures are dwindling because they're not taking vacations. They're not seeing movies or plays. They're not seeing Beyonce or Taylor Swift in concert, or even Ice Spice or SZA. And so according to the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco Economist, the Pinnacle, the American household had amassed about $2.1 trillion in excess savings, meaning savings above and beyond what they would have saved but for the pandemic. According to those same economists, all those savings and then some have been spent down. A $2.4 trillion drawdown in savings. Now, as those savings hit the economy in the form of expenditures, it juiced the economy. Look at the back half of 2023. Third quarter GDP in 2023 on an annualized basis of 4.7%. Fourth quarter, 3.4%. And then for all of last year, 2.8% growth. But now what are you left with increasingly? A consumer who has spent down their pandemic-era savings and who continues to face high and rising prices. Now, having spent all that money, many of these Americans improved their standard of living. They now live in nicer apartments. They wear nicer clothes from Vuori and Lululemon. They have taken nicer vacations, have dined to finer restaurants. But now the money's gone, the prices keep rising, so how do they maintain that standard of living? Well, of course, you just turn to the credit card. This U.S. credit card data is measured by the New York Federal Reserve. It is spiking. You've undoubtedly heard that this year credit card delinquency is up, auto loan delinquency is up, mortgage loan delinquency is up, and of course, student loan repayment terms have changed over the course of the year. And about a third of people with student loans are delinquent on those loans, which among other things impacts their credit score. This does not mean that recession is inevitable. This means that many consumers cannot spend as they have been. Now, wealthier households are responsible for about half of retail sales. That part of the economy, the artificial intelligence infrastructure boom part of the economy, the stock market part of the economy, the wealthy household part of the economy, that part of the economy is excellent. But for many Americans who live paycheck to paycheck, job market is slowing down in terms of creating new opportunities, and the prices keep rising. Now, I know there's been a lot of chit-chat this year about return to work. And about 54% of those who work for the Fortune 100 are now back at work in the office full-time 7 days a week. Well, 5 days a week, but in the office whenever they're in the office. But it is still the case that work from home is very popular. And our office market in this country was not built for so much work from home. And so one of the lingering legacies of the pandemic are these very high office vacancy rates. So this comes from CB Richard Ellis, CBRE. So San Francisco has a massive office market, 35% vacant. You perhaps had the good fortune of seeing the Chicago skyline. It's glorious, 27% vacant. Same thing, Seattle, 27% vacant. Now, of course, we care about the building owners. But macroeconomically, the risk is with the banks. And you may have heard, and this has nothing to do with real estate as it turns out, but some negative reports from the likes of Zion and Western Alliance, those kinds of banks. Not much to do with real estate as it turns out, but real estate does affect banks. They hold that real estate often in the form of collateral. So for instance, let me give you an example of what's been happening in America. About 9 months ago, the Wall Street Journal penned an article featuring downtown St. Louis. Now St. Louis, as you know, is a beautiful, historic American city. And the tallest building in downtown St. Louis is the AT&T building. It's 44 stories. And in 2006, that building sold for $205 million. It just sold for $3.5 million. And somebody takes that loss. It could be a series of equity holders in that building who chase that valuation down from purchase to purchase. Of course, that could be some bank's collateral. In Baltimore, 1 South Street, a prominent fixture on the skyline, there used to be the Alex Brown building, is now the Stephen building. In October of 2015, and 2015 you'll remember was a tough year for Baltimore, that was the year of the unrest, that building sold for $66 million. It sold during a recent time for $24 million. And a major US bank took a haircut on that deal. Now, cities, by the way, depend disproportionately on commercial tax base. Suburbs disproportionately on residential tax base. So in many parts of the country, commercial tax base is shrinking. Businesses are losing value, assessed value. And so now more cities find themselves in fiscal difficulty. One of the underappreciated drivers of economic growth in recent years has been state and local government spending. In part because on March 11th of 2021, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which among other things bequeathed $350 billion in direct fiscal support from the federal government to state and local governments. But that money by and large has now been spent. And now cities find themselves in fiscal difficulty. Let me just take these bullets in turn. With the city facing a projected $1.12 billion shortfall in 2026, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson said recently, quote, "We have reached a point of no return. That is not a beat." And they're not alone. Between December of 2024 and April of 2025, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Washington all experienced credit rating downgrades. And as you know, our state experienced credit rating downgrade. So for the first time in 52 years, Maryland no longer has a universal AAA bond rating. So we're seeing this at the state level as well in certain cases. Finally, according to research conducted by the Pew Charitable Trust, at least 20 of the nation's 25 largest or most populous cities have reported budget gaps for fiscal year 2026 and often beyond. So that's where we are. State and local government spending will not be the driver it's been. Of course, federal spending will not be the driver it has been, unless, of course, you're talking about the Defense Department. Hiring has slowed in the private sector, and so this economy is actively weakening. And let me use that as a transition, take us to the next part of the presentation, which is the penultimate part of the presentation, a discussion of real estate dynamics, the housing market. And I use this movie as a segue, 2016's Fences, This was a critically acclaimed film. And this is a film in which Denzel Washington stars as a Pittsburgh-based sanitation worker. A Pittsburgh-based sanitation worker, which means, of course, that Denzel can look good doing anything, even if it involves being in the city of Pittsburgh. So in any case, the most important price in the economy is the interest rate. So let me show you a couple more of those. 30-year fixed mortgage rate in blue, 50-year fixed mortgage rate in green. These data come from Freddie Mac. They're weekly data. And over the last week for true data, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate is sitting at 6.27%. You say, Anirban, you, sir, have a tendency to sensationalize, but even you cannot make a big deal out of a 6.27% 30-year fixed mortgage rate, because I can remember when mortgage rates were 21%, 18%, 15%, 13%, fair enough. But to millennials and Generation Z, the youngest members of the workforce, these rates are preposterously high. And that's who's really dropped out of the single-family home purchasing marketplace. It's been that would-be first-time buyer, frustrated by lack of inventory, high prices, and by their standards, extremely high borrowing costs. Now, as I move toward the tail end of this presentation, I'm going to try to switch to some leading economic indicators, because I want to pivot from a discussion of what's been happening to a discussion of what's likely to happen going forward. Now, here's a leading indicator. This is the U.S. Mortgage Loan Applications Composite Index. Why are mortgage applications a leading indicator? Because often the journey to settlement table begins with mortgage application. This is the first indication that someone now seeks to transact. But mortgage applications are down about 70% from their 2021 peak. So what does that tell us? Relatively few Americans are prepared to buy a home. They haven't even applied for their mortgage yet. Well, Anirban, if the buying public has been so dramatically truncated, housing market must be in horrific shape. But as you know, by many measures, it is not. Take U.S. home sales prices measured by the S&P Case-Shiller Home Price Index. Home sales prices in America have never been higher. You see this increase in home sales price during the pandemic and early stage of recovery therefrom. That's a 35% increase in U.S. home sales prices over a very short period of time. But of course, during the pandemic, our behavior changed. We're spending more time at home. We want more house. We want more square footage. We want room for home offices and home gyms. We want one room just for the Peloton. Now, anytime you see a Peloton advertising, the only piece of furniture in that room is the Peloton. That's how we Americans, the greatest people on this planet, choose to live. You buy a Peloton, you put it in a room, lock the door. And of course, then when people visit, you open the door, you splash some water on it. You know, millions have done it. But the point is, then the pandemic ended and mortgage rates took off. So I was thinking naively that we'd give back a meaningful chunk of these home sales price cuts. And you can see it happened for a few months, but not very deep and not very long. What did I fail to appreciate as an economist? What did I get wrong? I understood there are fewer buyers out there. What I failed to fully appreciate is how few sellers there would be. Because you're sitting in Kankakee, Illinois, or Duluth, Minnesota, or Glen Burnie, Maryland, with a 2.75% 30-year fixed. Where are you going? You're not going anywhere. The tail wags the dog. You might not like that house anymore. I mean, you liked it when you bought it, it fit your lifestyle, but now the kids have gone, so it's like you liked your neighbors, but then you met them. And so, so you want to move, but you can't move because your mortgage is 2.75%. You want to give that up for a 6.27% 30-year fixed mortgage rate. And so, in a country with a stubborn shortage of homes available for purchase, including for younger families, you end up with a stubbornly high home sales price. And by the way, this slide shows the percentage of the U.S. population that moved in the past year. It's plummeted. We're just staying where we are. And so that's the story on the housing market. So that takes me to the final part of the presentation, the forecast. The glory is yours because this presentation is almost over. This is Denzel, by the way, fighting in the Civil War for the Massachusetts 54th. But let me show you again some more leading economic indicators, beginning with the University of Michigan's Index of Consumer Sentiment. How do consumers feel about the economy right now? They're miserable. And what has them so miserable? Inflation and expectations of inflation, rising prices. People ask me all the time, Anirban, why do Americans drive angry? Because they're angry. And you just see them when they're driving. That's the point. And they're upset about these very rapid increases in price. And we'll see what happens with healthcare costs. Because that will be, in part, a function of what's going to happen with these negotiations in Washington, D.C., as they, at some point, reopen the economy. And, by the way, the consumer's not the only one who's become quite dour about the economic outlook. So, too, is small business. This is the National Federation of Independent Businesses Index of Small Business Optimism. Question Small Business America, is it a good time to expand your business over the next 3 months? Now, let me take you through some history here very briefly. Tail end of the Biden administration. When asked the question, is it a good time to expand my business over the next 3 months? Tail end of the Biden administration, 4% said yes, akin to what we saw during the global financial crisis. But then on November 5th of 2024, Donald John Trump is reelected president of the United States. The next reading comes out at 20%. Think it's a good time. Small business tends to swing conservative politically. But then all this talk about tariffs, shifting immigration policy, and stubbornly high interest rates, and now the most recent reading is 11%. And why does that matter? Because small business creates the bulk of net new jobs in America. And if we start to see an increase in layoff activity, we've got a real problem, because one of the things that we're seeing is that hiring has really softened. This is the US hires rate. So this is the number of hires in a given month divided by the number of people receiving a paycheck. You can see here the hires rate has really started to move to the downside. So if you see a pickup in layoffs, and we have not seen that yet, but if you do, that's a problem, because we're not hiring enough to countervail that. So when you look at forecasts for economic growth going forward, I'll skip that, I'll go to this. Generally speaking, major financial institutions have a forecast between 1.5 and 2% in terms of the forecast for economic growth. And many brokerages also have in mind a very elevated probability of recession in the next 12 months. In a typical year, the risk of recession is between 10 and 15%. But now when you look at Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, somewhere between 30 and 40%. Why? Because the economic expansion has narrowed. The number of segments that are pushing the economy forward it's a shorter list. It's artificial intelligence, related investment in power generation and distribution, the spending by wealthy households, and the stock market. Beyond that, it's difficult to find major drivers of economic growth. If the stock market corrects, if wealthy people get nervous too, then that may be a trigger for a recession. And that's why the risk of recession is so elevated. Now, that brings me back to that one big beautiful bill. It is also the case that you're going to see a pickup of investment, you already have, because of the restoration of bonus depreciation, and wealthier households get significant tax benefits from the bill. And so it is less likely, therefore, that they're going to curtail their spending and the economy is going to end up in recession. Nonetheless, I would agree that over the course of the year, the risk of recession has increased. So that takes me to my final slide, because we are out of time. Though Out of Time was also a 2003 Denzel Washington film that also starred Eva Mendes. Though I have not yet met her, I'm scouring the nation's airports, of course. But in any case, look, could the economy surprise the downside? It already has. Because think about what many people in business were thinking about on January 1st of this year. They're thinking, my goodness, if the US economy could expand under President Joe Biden, imagine what it can accomplish under the businessman, Donald John Trump. But the year has turned out differently. Lots of uncertainty in the economy. Tariffs, of course, impact different businesses differentially. And so here we are. So inflation is poised to stage a comeback. It already has been. I blame tariffs for that. Look, I'm not arguing against the tariffs, by the way. I understand the administration is trying to achieve some fairly laudable goals. Reindustrialization of America, securing the nation by insisting on more production of pharmaceuticals, steel, aluminum, etc., semiconductors. But in the short term, tariffs are inflationary. Interest rates will be higher for longer. Not the short-term interest rates controlled by the Federal Reserve. I'm talking about the long-term interest rates at which we actually transact. Our commercial lines of credit, our 30 fixed mortgage rate, because long-term interest rates are anchored to inflation expectations, and those are on the rise. Many consumers now exhausted financially, we talked about that, and circumstances could worsen because prices keep rising. And by the way, watch out for electricity rates in this region going forward. That is really going to hit a lot of American households. Again, wealthy folk, fine. A four-figure electricity bill is not the end of the world for them. But again, for many Americans who live paycheck to paycheck and are already paying a fortune for groceries, apartments, so on and so forth, that's the group about which one might be concerned. Our asset prices are overextended. We've had a stock market boom this year. It's been fun. Oh, by the way, gold is sitting at $4,300 an ounce. Silver at $52 an ounce. Now, when people buy gold and silver, that's risk off. They're trying to get away from financial assets. But the stock market's been booming at the same time. That's risk on. Somebody's wrong. So we'll see what that looks like. But the recovery in the stock market, the expansion has been quite narrow. About 7 companies, the Magnificent 7, companies like Amazon and Apple, Google, Alphabet, and Microsoft. And then, of course, 3 others, Palantir, Broadcom, and Oracle have really led the charge. But outside of that, it's pretty narrow. And so, again, this economic expansion is built on a thin reed. So forecasts for growth in 2025, I still think it is. I'm probably less pessimistic than most economists. But there are risks now, I have to admit that, including rising interest rates, potentially as inflation continues to tick higher, and falling asset prices for that reason and the slowdown in the economy. And that's because of, well, you know, all this uncertainty coming out of Washington, D.C. And with that, hopefully I've left some time for Q&A. I've actually left 10 minutes for Q&A according to which is about 10 minutes longer than I'd hoped to leave. But let's turn to that now. Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, Anirban, I'll let you pick whichever hand you want, and I'll bring the microphone to you. So how about somebody maybe up in the front? We have a question right over
there. Hand way over there.
I see it.
The hypotenuse, yes.
Now I can't hear it, all right? Tell a joke or something.
Baltimore Ravens. Is that not funny? Okay, yes.
So I just heard yesterday, U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the H-1B visa fee that the current administration has imposed. Can you comment about goals and objectives and impact?
Right, so this administration is very transactional, as you know. They're also offering golden visas, if people are willing to pay, $1 million or $5 million, whatever the number is, to become, to come to this country. Yes, as you know, the Trump administration recently slapped a $100,000 fee on H-1B visas. By and large, that is a fee on Indians, as it turns out, because about 72 or 73% of H-1B visas are issued to Indians, about 11 to 12% to Chinese. What can I tell you? The Indians actually are delighted, because the Indians suffer a major brain drain. India doesn't have much oil or coal or natural gas or natural resources generally, but what they have is the greatest renewable resource of all, which is really smart young people who happen to be great in math, very analytical. And for decades, they've been losing that population to Singapore, Dubai, England, Australia, and of course the United States and Canada. But if fewer of them come to the United States, more likely to stay there in India and have their career there. Banks like Citibank and others actually have expanded already in India, knowing that these Indians are going to be there in India, these graduates of IIM and IIT and these other institutions, and so the brain drain actually from India slows. So the Indians are actually not that upset. Many of these young people are because they want to come to America. They want to live in Silicon Valley and Boston and Washington, D.C., New York. But the nation as a whole is not that upset. Look, I don't think it's great policymaking, because I would think that you want to add human capital here. So if you think about the classic, and this is also for the young people, if you think about the classic macroeconomic production function, what is it? F as a production function, it includes two inputs, and those are physical capital and human capital. And that's your production function. We want more physical capital in this country, right? So one of the reasons we have these tariffs is we want to have more manufacturing in this country, more steel, more aluminum, more pharmaceuticals, more semiconductors, more, all of those things. But you have to add in the human capital as a complement to the physical capital. But we're stiff-arming that human capital, the importation of that human capital. I'm talking about, by the way, documented migration here, right? We're talking about H-1B visas, documented. And by the way, it's a bias here, I'm a huge fan of immigration. Look at me. It's written on my face. I could write it on my forehead, but it would be redundant. And so I think this is actually a mistake, because we want to bring the best and the brightest to this country. As a free society that can embrace people from every cultural background, that's one of our advantages. When I go to Japan, you know what I see? A lot of people who look like they're from Japan. In America, you go to Queens, no one looks like they're from anywhere, right? Everyone looks like they're from everywhere. It's amazing, but that's human capital. And so I think ultimately this will not benefit the U.S. economy. But again, that's part of my bias.
Thank you, Anirban. We have a question over here. Andrea Bursler from the library.
Oh, good.
All right, so we have an aging workforce. We have people who, the last of the boomers, the beginning of Gen X, who aren't retiring. What kind of impact do you see on that with the workforce as well?
This is a great question. Actually, inflation plays a role in this, because many people have postponed their retirement, and you'll meet many Americans who will tell you, I will never retire. I cannot afford to retire. And what that means is that those jobs are filled and therefore not available to younger workers. You may have heard that the job market for recent college graduates is the worst in recent memory. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's artificial intelligence. That artificial intelligence is displacing that entry-level white-collar worker, whether it's that customer service representative or whomever it happens to be, jobs otherwise filled by college graduates. But I think one of the other reasons is that many older Americans, again, Generation X, baby boomers, are holding on to their jobs for longer, and therefore you have less churn. No one wants to quit. And again, inflation plays a part because retirement is expensive under normal circumstances. These are not normal circumstances. Housing costs have gone up, grocery bills have gone up, electricity prices have gone up, healthcare has gone up in terms of cost. So a lot of things going on here. Eventually people have to retire, as it turns out, one way or the other. But it's one of the reasons I think that young people are having so much difficulty in the labor market right now is because older workers are holding on to those jobs longer.
Very good. We have another question over at this table. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Julie Dillon from Carroll County Public Library. My question is, you talked a lot about how commercial real estate people are taking losses, but what percentage of those losses are people who had to take the capital loss to offset for tax purposes?
Right, so it's true that sometimes losses are generated strategically to offset passive income, right? So you might remember in the 1980s when people, you might actually don't remember that, but some of us remember the 1980s, tax shelters were very common back then. And at that point, you could take passive losses against your active income. So if you had a physician, let's say making $250,000 a year in private practice, if they could invest in an oil and natural gas partnership or an office building that lost money on paper, they could take those losses, past losses, against their active income, they would pay no taxes. But then the law changed in 1986, and so now if you take passive losses, it's only against passive income, not against your active income. In any case, the point is, yes, passive losses are valuable if you have other investments generating passive gains, investment gains. But I gotta tell you, a lot of this is not strategic. A lot of this is because these building owners do not have the liquidity or the capital to reinvest in their buildings to re-tenant them. The vacancies are largely among Class B and Class C properties, older office buildings. The trophy buildings are still doing very handsomely in terms of leasing activity. It's those older buildings. So you've got these owners of older buildings. It's not clear to them how much they want to put into these older buildings, and if they even put money into them, if they're going to be competitive and be released anyway. And many banks, by the way, are saying, well, we're not going to give you money, building owner, for tenant improvement. Any free cash flow you have, we want you to pay down your existing debt. We're not going to give you more debt, even if it means that you're going to have to forego some future tenants because you're not going to be able to do that tenant improvement. So that's where we are right now. I don't think this is so much strategic. The macroeconomy and remote work is bearing down on these owners, and they're taking huge losses.
Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions. There, and we're going to end with one from Gerstel.
Yeah, my question to you is, I've been watching the news. I'm not a CNN or a Fox person, but I watch mostly MSNBC, whatever, financial networks. I've watched our country starting to be isolated. I've watched our neighbors saying, we've had enough here, carries on, we're going to start dealing with China. Canada's gone, Mexico's gone, India's starting to talk with them. Where are we going to be at the end of this cycle?
Right. So, it's a very good question, the notion of American isolation for the rest of the world. Of course, it's been the Americans who have been at the vanguard of the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, United Nations, so on and so forth. We've been the most engaged. And I think actually, arguably, the biggest beneficiary of globalization. I mean, we're the wealthiest society, but unfortunately, we left a lot of people behind as the economy adapted to globalization. And so, you can see the response. I think a lot of the world realizes, look, this president's only going to be president for another 3+ years. For better or for worse, I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's not my role here. But that at some point, the Americans are going to re-engage the rest of the world. There'll be a new president. And we'll see, what that president brings to the table. But, Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada, Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, others have said, look, we're engaged with the Americans, but we're waiting. We're waiting for the next president to a certain extent. But we want to maintain cordial relations now, and then we'll redefine our relationship with the next president, whomever that happens to be. And so whether it's Gavin Newsom or the current vice president, whomever it happens to be, J.D. Vance, we don't know. So what can I tell you? You can't ignore America because we're a quarter of global output. We're a quarter of the global economy. And so we just can't be ignored. We have the most powerful defense. We have the most sophisticated intelligence agencies. We have embassies everywhere. We are almost everyone's leading trading partner. They might not be our leading trading partner, but we're their leading purchaser of their goods. So you can't ignore us, even if you don't like us all the time. So yeah, I'm not too worried because this is a 3-year phenomenon, not a decades-long phenomenon. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess I'm back on. All right, one last question if you stand up from Gerstel.
Hey, Gerstel, young people.
My name is Trent Taylor. I go to Goucher Academy, and my question is, with the rising global tensions and trade wars, do you think tariffs are starting to become more of a political tool over an economic tool?
Right, so good question. So part of the issue is this, that, you know, the president was inaugurated January 20th. This is still new. And one of the questions people have had, it's a wonderful question by the way, one of the questions people have had is what's the end game here? Because for a while there, the notion among many economists and other observers was this, that the president is creating cudgels. He's raising tariffs on the Swiss and the Europeans, the Mexicans, Canadians, Indians, Chinese, many others. There are countries in sub-Saharan Africa facing a 50% tariff as well. And he's doing this because the rest of the world has been unfair to US exporters, which by the way is true. So if you read reports by the World Bank has said the Americans are right. American exporters have been treated unfairly. There have been significant tariff and non-tariff barriers against the American exporters, and that's one of the reasons that the Americans have such a large trade deficit with the balance of the world. So many people thought, well, okay, what the administration is going to do, they're going to create trade agreements, they're going to force other nations to reduce their barriers against our exports to those countries, and as they do that, reduce those barriers, we will reduce our tariffs against them in turn. And what will happen at the end of the day is fair and freer trade. That's the notion. And many economists love that story, by the way, because we're taught to like fair and free trade. But now what has happened? I think the federal government has become addicted to these revenues. So in August, depending on which estimate you look at, the government generated between $23 and $29 billion in tariff and tariff-related revenues. It's hard to give that up. And so I think these high tariffs are here to stay for quite some time. And in fact, is it not the case that rather than reducing tariffs as trade agreements are reached, that recently the Trump administration has been raising tariffs on things like upholstered furniture, kitchen cabinets, more tariffs on softwood lumber, yes. So it's both a political weapon, but also an economic tool to raise revenues. There are many Americans who think that this is a tax on foreigners, by the way. And foreigners economically take some of the burden of tariffs. But the most significant bearer of the burden of tariffs are consumers. Somewhere in the range of 60 to 80% of tariff costs end up falling upon the American consumer. And so that's inflationary. So that's where we are right now. You can tell from my voice, I don't love the idea of tariffs. Again, I was taught in the post-World War II environment to not like barriers to trade. I was taught that we had a Great Depression start out globally in 1929. It was worsened because nations started putting tariff barriers against one another in the 1930s, created the conditions for World War II, and then after World War II, the world said no more of that. We're going to turn swords into plowshares. We're going to create the International Monetary Fund, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the World Bank, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, the GATT becomes the World Trade Organization. We're going to come together. Instead of going to war with one another, France and Germany, you become leading trading partners. And we have not had World War III. That's what I was taught. But now, of course, as a response to that globalization, a push against it, and now these tariffs are part of the manifestation of that pushback, but also a significant economic tool to generate revenues. So that's where we are. I know that was not a great answer to your question, but I sure did say a lot. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anirban. Thank you so much. You did a great job. You know when a guy does a good job, when people keep kind of clapping and they want him to stay. So we're going to keep him for another hour now, right? You will just miss your flight. When I think of you, I think of an entrepreneur and somebody who's a great example. I remember I saw you first time like 20 years ago when I was with Pulte Homes, and you spoke at like a bar or a restaurant in Annapolis, and I didn't know how to pronounce your name. A lot of people still don't, but I mean, since then you've carved a niche for yourself, you know, and you do a great job. I want another round of applause. We're going to bring it back next year. Don't forget now, the students are going to want to get a picture with you, maybe each group. Afterwards, we'll have you up front. I want to thank a lot of people. I want to thank, where's Becky? Becky and Megan over here for doing a great job organizing this. I want to thank Richard. Nice job, Richard. Very, very good as usual. All of our sponsors, obviously. Make sure I didn't miss anybody. The people here, Pleasant Valley, what a great job. You guys are all to be thanked for being here. And we've got a lot of our events on a little card in the table, so please do check that out. And have a wonderful day. Thanks.